The morning the wedding invitation should have arrived, I found myself standing in my kitchen in Boulder, Colorado, watching steam rise from my coffee cup like small ghosts dissipating into autumn air. September 14th, 2024. A Saturday that felt unnaturally quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. My name is Margot Elena Whitmore, and I am 34 years old, exactly 3 years and 8 months older than my sister, Celestine Grace. We grew up in the kind of New England household where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where Christmas cards were meticulously staged, but genuine affection was rationed like wartime provisions. I knew Celestine was getting married. Our mother, Patricia, had mentioned it during one of our stilted monthly phone calls, her voice carrying that particular mixture of excitement and calculated omission that I'd learned to recognize over decades of family navigation. "Celestine's found someone wonderful," she'd said, her words bright and brittle as glass. "A young man from a very good family. December wedding, of course. Very elegant." What she didn't say echoed louder than her carefully chosen words. "You won't be invited." I set my coffee cup down on the reclaimed wood countertop I'd spent 3 weekends sanding and refinishing. The physical labor had been meditative, transformative, each stroke of sandpaper removing, not just old varnish but layers of familial expectations I'd carried like stones in my pockets. For too long. The choice to move to Colorado 5 years ago had been precisely that, a choice. Not an escape, though my mother would frame it that way in conversations with her book club friends. Not abandonment, though Celestine's accusatory texts suggested otherwise. Simply a necessary relocation of my life's center of gravity from the suffocating orbit of family dysfunction to a place where I could finally breathe. "You always thought you were better than us," Celestine had written in her last message, sent 14 months ago, moving across the country like we weren't good enough. "Don't expect me to chase after you anymore," I hadn't responded. What could I say? That I'd left because staying meant disappearing? That loving my family required first learning to locate myself within the tangled architecture of our shared history? The September sun climbed higher, illuminating dust particles that danced in diagonal shafts of light. My small craftsman bungalow, purchased with money carefully saved from my work as a restoration architect, felt both sanctuary and statement, proof that I could build something beautiful without requiring anyone's permission or approval. I opened my laptop, pulled up social media with the kind of reluctant curiosity that accompanies checking a wound for signs of healing. Celestine's Facebook page bloomed with engagement photos, bridal shower images, registry links. Her fiancé, Marcus Wellington Ashford Farr, appeared in carefully curated shots, tall, conventionally handsome, with the particular confidence that comes from generational wealth and unquestioned belonging. In every photograph, his hand rested possessively on Celestine's shoulder, her waist the small of her back. Something about his grip made my restoration architect's eye notice the pressure, the way Celestine's smile never quite reached her eyes in those moments of contact. But perhaps I was projecting. Perhaps distance had made me paranoid, suspicious of happiness I hadn't been invited to witness. Part 2. The Silence. Between December 17th, 2024 arrived with early snow, the kind that transforms Boulder into something resembling a New England Christmas card, ironic and complete. Celestine's wedding day. I spent the morning working on blueprints for the renovation of a historic fire station, my pencil moving across vellum with the meditative precision that had become my form of prayer. Outside my studio window, the flatirons rose against a sky the color of old silver, indifferent and eternal. My phone sat silent on my drafting table. No unexpected invitation. No last-minute reconciliation. Just the predictable absence I'd been preparing for since September. At 2:47 p.m., I remember the exact time because I was checking it compulsively. Imagining the ceremony unfolding 2,000 miles away, my phone finally vibrated. Not a call, but a text from my cousin, Imogen Reeves. "Margot, check your messages. Something happened at the wedding. Call me," my hands went cold. That particular phrasing, "something happened," carries weight that more specific language cannot. It suggests disruption too large for easy categorization, chaos that requires witness rather than explanation. I called Imogen immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't initially identify. Not quite shock. Something closer to validation tinged with horror. "Margot," she said, and then paused, seeming to gather herself. Marcus slapped Celestine during the reception, and someone filmed it. The words arrived but didn't immediately penetrate. Slapped. Celestine. Filmed. What do you mean, slapped? I heard myself asking, as if there were degrees of violence that might make the sentence more comprehensible. I mean, he hit her. Open palm across her face, in front of 300 wedding guests. Imogen's voice cracked. She'd been talking to one of his groomsmen, laughing. Marcus pulled her aside. They were arguing near the bar, and then he just did it. The whole room went silent, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out. I sat down, my legs suddenly unreliable. Where is she now? She locked herself in the bridal suite. Your mother is trying to convince her it was a misunderstanding. That Marcus was stressed, that Celestine must have provoked him somehow. Imogen's disgust came through clearly. Aunt Patricia is more concerned about the guests and the embarrassment than about Celestine's actual safety. This I could believe. Our mother had spent decades perfecting the art of reputation management, treating family dysfunction like PR problems requiring strategic spin rather than genuine intervention. The video? I asked, already circulating. Someone posted it to TikTok before hotel security could confiscate phones. It's spreading fast. I opened the app with shaking hands, typed in wedding slap, and watched my sister's humiliation replicate across my screen. The video quality was surprisingly clear, someone's iPhone capturing what should have been celebration. Celestine in her wedding dress. Custom Vera Wang according to her Instagram posts, looking ethereally beautiful. Marcus, still in his tuxedo, his face contorted with rage that seemed disproportionate to whatever had preceded this moment. The argument I couldn't hear. And then the slap, sharp, vicious, unmistakable. The sound carried even through phone speakers. Celestine's head snapped to the side, her carefully styled hair coming loose, her hand rising to her reddening cheek. What haunted me most was the split second before impact, when Celestine's expression revealed that this wasn't the first time. There was no surprise in her eyes, only resignation and a terrible, practiced bracing. The video had already accumulated 47,000 views. The comment section seethed with outrage, speculation, armchair psychology, strangers dissecting my sister's private anguish with the casual cruelty of people who'd never had their worst moments broadcast for entertainment. I watched it 3 times, each viewing peeling back another layer of my own complicated emotions. Horror at the violence, fury at Marcus, but underneath a darker current, a kind of grim vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the problem. Something was wrong, and now everyone can see it. The guilt that accompanied this thought was immediate and acidic. Part 3. The vigilly booked a flight to Boston that evening. The last seat on a red-eye that would get me there by dawn. My hands moved automatically, packing, calling a neighbor to check on my cat, forwarding work emails, while my mind struggled to process the rapid recalibration of reality. For 5 years, I'd been positioned as the difficult daughter, the one who'd abandoned family obligations for selfish Western pursuits. My mother's narrative had been consistent. Margot chose herself over us. Margot thinks she's too good for family. Margot holds grudges over ancient history, and I'd begun to believe elements of it, to wonder if my boundaries were actually barriers, if my self-preservation was actually self-absorption. But that video changed something fundamental. It provided external validation for instincts I'd been taught to doubt. The flight was turbulent, December storms making the descent into Logan bumpy enough that the flight attendants remained seated. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching lightning illuminate cloud formations that looked like mountain ranges, like the flatirons I'd left behind. Imogen picked me up at arrivals at 6:23 a.m., her Toyota smelling of coffee and exhaustion. She looked like she hadn't slept, dark circles beneath eyes that held a mixture of relief and apprehension at seeing me. "Thank you for coming," she said, pulling into traffic. "I wasn't sure you would. Where else would I be?" "I don't know. You've been pretty clear about maintaining distance." The comment stung because it was accurate. I had maintained distance, carefully necessarily, with the deliberation of someone who'd learned that proximity to family meant slow erosion of self. "Is Celestine still at the hotel?" "No. They're at the Ashford family estate in Wellesley. Marcus's parents convinced Patricia that taking Celestine there would contain the situation better than a hotel full of lingering guests and paparazzi." "Paparazzi?" Imogen glanced at me, her expression grim. The video hit Twitter. Then Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. Some tabloid identified Marcus's family. Old money, hedge fund connections. This is national news now. Hedge fund heir assaults bride at luxury wedding. Everyone's reporting it. We drove in silence through familiar streets made strange by absence and early morning emptiness. Boston in December has a particular quality. Historical and cold, beautiful in a way that feels almost punishing. Every brick building, every narrow street carried memories I'd spent 5 years trying to integrate rather than simply escape. What does Celestine say? I finally asked. Nothing. She won't see anyone except your mother, and Patricia is apparently working on damage control. Talking about how Marcus comes from a good family, how this was an isolated incident, how Celestine needs to consider her future. My hands clenched in my lap. She needs to consider her safety, you'd think. But you know, Patricia, appearances matter more than actualities. We pulled up to the Ashford estate just after 7. The house, mansion really, sat behind iron gates and mature landscaping, the kind of generational wealth that whispers rather than shouts. Security cameras tracked our approach. A guard in a small gatehouse checked Imogen's ID before waving us through. The circular driveway could have accommodated a dozen cars. Only 3 were there, a Mercedes, a Range Rover, and what I recognized as my mother's Lexus. The front door opened before we reached it. Not a butler, as I half expected, but Marcus himself, his face pale and haggard, wearing expensive loungewear that somehow made him look more pathetic rather than less. Imogen, he said, his voice carefully modulated. I'm not sure this is a good time. Is my sister here? I interrupted, stepping forward. Because I'm not leaving until I see her. Marcus's eyes focused on me for the first time, recognition dawning slowly. Margot, I didn't know you were... Celestine said you two weren't speaking. Where is she? She's resting. Yesterday was traumatic, for all of us. His emphasis on those last 3 words was deliberate, positioning himself as fellow victim rather than perpetrator. I think what everyone needs to understand is that emotions were high. There was alcohol involved. Things escalated in a way that I asked where she is. Not for your justifications. Something flickered in his expression. Anger, quickly suppressed. The mask of contrition was good, practiced. But I'd spent years learning to read the spaces between people's words and their truths, and Marcus Wellington Ashford IV was transparent in his calculation. Upstairs, he finally said. 3rd door on the left. But your mother asked not to be disturbed. I walked past him, Imogen following, our footsteps echoing on marble floors. The interior of the house was exactly what I'd imagined. Museum quality without being lived in, expensive without being warm. Portraits of Ashford ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following our progress with colonial judgment. We found my mother in a sitting room outside what I assumed was the bedroom. Patricia Whitmore sat in a wingback chair upholstered in silk damask, her posture perfect even in crisis. Her expression carefully neutral until she saw me. Margot. My name in her mouth was accusation and surprise equally weighted. What are you doing here? I'm here for Celestine. Celestine needs family right now who understand the complexity of the situation, not judgment from someone who's been absent for... Mom. Imogen's voice cut through quietly. Margot flew across the country overnight. Let her see her sister. For a long moment, my mother simply looked at me, some unreadable calculation happening behind her composed facade. Finally, she stood, smoothing her cashmere cardigan. She's sleeping. The doctor gave her something to help her rest. The doctor Marcus's family provided. The family physician. A very reputable man. I'm sure he is. But I'm still going in. I moved past her before she could protest further, opening the door as quietly as I could. The bedroom was enormous, dominated by a canopy bed that looked like it belonged in a period drama. Celestine lay there, small and fragile against white linens, her face turned toward the window where weak winter light filtered through heavy curtains. The bruise on her left cheek had darkened overnight, purple and yellow, grotesque against her pale skin. Her wedding makeup had been removed, revealing the full extent of the damage. Not just the handprint, but the smaller marks I suspected were older, carefully concealed with foundation and practice positioning for photographs. I sat carefully on the edge of the bed. Celestine's eyes opened slowly, unfocused from whatever sedative she'd been given. For several seconds, she just looked at me, Confusion giving way to recognition, giving way to something that looked like relief mixed with shame. Margot? Her voice was hoarse. You're really here? I'm really here. Tears spilled down her cheeks, following tracks that suggested this wasn't the first crying session since yesterday. I didn't invite you to the wedding. I know. I was so mean to you. In my messages, the things I said, shh, we don't have to do this now, but I need to. I need you to know that She struggled to sit up, wincing. I was so angry at you for leaving, for having the courage to just walk away from all of this. From Mom's expectations and the family drama and the constant performance, I hated that you could do what I couldn't. I took her hand carefully, mindful of her fragility. Tell me about Marcus. How long has this been happening? Celestine's expression shuddered, old defensive patterns asserting themselves. Yesterday was the first time he actually hit me. He has a temper, but usually he's just controlling. About who I talk to, what I wear, how I spend my time. His family is very particular about appearances, about what's appropriate for someone in his position. Celestine, listen to yourself. You're describing abuse. Don't, she pulled her hand away. Don't reduce it to something simple like that. Marcus loves me. He's under a lot of pressure from his father, from the business. Yesterday I was flirting with Jordan, one of his groomsmen, and embarrassing him in front of his family. I should have known better. The familiar alchemy of abuse, turning perpetrator into victim, victim into provocateur. I'd seen it in restoration work, the way structural damage gets normalized over time, how people learn to navigate around cracks and instability rather than address the fundamental problems. What are you going to do? I asked quietly. What can I do? The video is everywhere. Everyone's seen it. Mom says if I leave now, I'll look unstable, like I'm overreacting. That Marcus's family has lawyers who will destroy my reputation. That I need to think about my future, about our prenup. I signed it the week before the wedding. Marcus's father insisted. If we divorce within the first 5 years, I get nothing. And if the divorce is because of something I did, infidelity, abandonment, making false accusations, I could actually owe them money for reputational damage. The rage that moved through me was cold and clarifying. That's not legal. A prenup can't, their lawyers say it is. And they have better lawyers than I could ever afford. I stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the manicured grounds stretched toward a line of trees marking the property boundary. Everything about this place was designed to intimidate, to remind people of their place in hierarchies of power and money. You need to leave, I said, turning back to her. Not in 5 years when some legal document says it's financially safe. Now, today. And go where? Mom's already made it clear she thinks I should stay, work through this like adults. And I don't have anywhere else. You come with me. To Colorado. You stay with me until you figure out what's next. Celestine laughed, the sound sharp and broken. Just like that? You want me to blow up my entire life and run away with you? Yes, exactly like that. Part 4. The extraction what followed was less dramatic escape than logistical negotiation, but no less significant. I gave Celestine an hour to rest, to let the sedative wear off enough for clear thinking. Imogen and I spent that time in careful conversation with my mother, not asking permission but informing her of what was happening. A subtle but crucial distinction. This is ridiculous, Patricia kept saying, her voice rising with each iteration. Celestine is married now. She has obligations, commitments. You can't just sweep in after years of absence and convince her to abandon her husband the day after their wedding. What will people think? I don't care what people think, I said, the truth of it settling into my bones with satisfying weight. I care about Celestine's safety, and if you cared about that more than your reputation, you'd be helping instead of obstructing. My mother's face went pale, then flushed. How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I've done for this family, the sacrifices... Mom. Imogen's voice was gentle but firm. The video has 9 million views. CNN is running stories about domestic violence at high society weddings. This isn't something you can PR manage away. Celestine staying here, acting like everything is fine, that's not going to protect anyone's reputation. It's just going to make it worse. The truth of this seemed to penetrate Patricia's carefully constructed defenses. She sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than her 62 years. What about Marcus? His family? Let them worry about themselves, I said. By noon, we had Celestine's essential belongings packed: clothes, documents, laptop, the jewelry her grandmother had left her. Marcus tried to intercede twice. First with placating words about counseling and second chances, then with barely veiled threats about legal consequences and family obligations. "You're making a mistake," he said to Celestine, blocking the bedroom doorway. "Running away with your unstable sister isn't going to solve anything. Come back downstairs, we'll talk through this properly with both our families present." I stepped between them. "Move or I call the police and show them the video." That video is being taken out of context. Anyone can see Celestine provoked. "Move! Now!" Something in my voice, or perhaps in my absolute lack of fear, made him step aside. We walked past him, down the grand staircase, through the museum-like foyer. Marcus's parents appeared from somewhere. His mother's face a mask of refined horror. His father's expression calculating. "Young lady," Marcus Sr. said, addressing Celestine, "I hope you understand the legal ramifications of leaving without properly discussing this with counsel. The prenuptial agreement has very specific clauses about abandonment and—" "Sue me," Celestine said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all morning. "I don't care. I'm leaving." We drove away from the Ashford estate at 12:47 p.m., Imogen at the wheel, Celestine in the passenger seat, me in the back with our hastily packed bags. No one spoke for the first 15 minutes, as if words might somehow break the spell of our escape. Finally, Celestine turned to look at me, her eyes red but clear. "Thank you," she said simply. "You don't need to thank me. I do. For coming. For not saying I told you so. For giving me somewhere to go. You're my sister. Where else would I go?" Part 5. The Aftermath. We flew back to Boulder that evening, Celestine wearing borrowed clothes and sunglasses that covered most of the bruising. The video continued its viral trajectory, 12 million views by the time we boarded, trending on every social media platform, dissected by everyone from domestic violence advocates to entertainment lawyers to people who just enjoyed watching strangers' trauma unfold. Marcus released a statement through his family's PR firm. "I deeply regret my actions at what should have been a joyous occasion. I was overwhelmed by emotion and stress, and I reacted in a way that was completely unacceptable. I am seeking help and ask for privacy as my wife and I work through this difficult time together." The statement was masterful in its manipulation, acknowledging wrongdoing while minimizing it, painting himself as victim of circumstance, asserting continued marriage when Celestine was actively fleeing. "He called me his wife," Celestine said, reading it on her phone during our layover in Denver, like I still belong to him. "The marriage can be annulled," I said. "One day, documentation of abuse. You have grounds. His lawyers will fight it. The prenup was signed under duress. And prenups don't protect abusers. We'll get you a good lawyer. Someone who specializes in this." Celestine set her phone down, looking out at the tarmac where planes landed and departed with mechanical regularity. "I don't know how to thank you for this. For believing me. I'll always believe you. Even though I was horrible to you. Even though I chose Mom's narrative over trusting my own sister. I thought about this carefully, wanting to be honest without being cruel. You weren't ready to see what I was seeing. Sometimes we have to learn things on our own timeline, not anyone else's. I couldn't save you from this. You had to decide to save yourself, and you gave me the option to. That's what matters." We landed in Boulder just after 8, the city lights scattered across the darkness like grounded stars. My house, our house now, at least temporarily, welcomed us with warmth and the smell of the potpourri my neighbor had kindly refreshed. Celestine stood in the entryway, taking in the exposed beams, the carefully restored woodwork, the evidence of patient labor transformed into beauty. "This is really lovely," she said softly. "It's home. Make yourself comfortable." That first night, Celestine slept in my guest room while I lay awake in my own bed, listening to the house settle, processing the seismic shift of the past 48 hours. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, from Imogen, from concerned friends who'd seen the video, from my mother alternating between fury and guilt. One message, arriving at 2:34 a.m., was from Marcus himself. "You think you're saving her? But you're just enabling her worst impulses. Celestine needs structure, guidance. She's impulsive and emotional, and you're encouraging her to make decisions she'll regret." When this falls apart, when she realizes what she's thrown away, don't say I didn't warn you. Tell her I love her and I'm willing to forgive this lapse in judgment. I blocked his number without responding. Part 6. The Unfolding. The next weeks unfolded with surprising gentleness. Celestine moved through my house like someone learning a new language, tentative, occasionally frustrated, slowly discovering vocabularies of autonomy she'd never been taught. We established rhythms. Morning coffee on the back deck, watching the flatirons catch dawn light. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood, Celestine's bruises fading from purple to yellow to gone. Evening dinners where we talked about everything except the wedding, the video, the life she'd left behind in Boston. She began attending a support group for domestic violence survivors, coming home from those sessions quiet and thoughtful. She got a job at a local bookstore, nothing glamorous, but hers earned through her own interview, paid at an hourly rate she controlled. I've never had my own money before, she told me one evening in early February. Dad always paid for school, then Marcus took over all the finances. Even my credit cards were connected to his accounts. This paycheck is the first money that's actually mine. The video's viral momentum eventually slowed, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. But the impact lingered. Marcus lost his position at his father's firm, the Ashford family's reputation damaged beyond their lawyer's ability to spin. Celestine received dozens of messages from other women sharing similar stories, finding courage in her unintended visibility. Marcus's attempts at contact continued, emails that oscillated between apologetic and accusatory, gifts sent to my address that we donated without opening, even a surprise visit in March that ended with me calling police when he refused to leave my property. The annulment proceedings began in April, spearheaded by an excellent attorney Imogen found through her professional network. Marcus's lawyers fought every point, but the video was incontrovertible evidence. The prenup was voided. The marriage was dissolved. By summer, Celestine was legally single again, her name restored, her future unencumbered. Part 7. The Reconstruction in June. I took Celestine to a property I'd been hired to restore, a Victorian mansion in the mountains outside Boulder, abandoned for 30 years, beautiful and broken in equal measure. We stood in what had once been the grand parlor, sunlight streaming through gaps in the roof, wildflowers growing through cracks in the floorboards. "What do you see when you look at this?" I asked her. Celestine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes tracing the water-damaged ceiling, the collapsed fireplace, the graceful bones of the house visible beneath decades of neglect. "I see something that was almost destroyed but wasn't," she finally said. "Something that can be beautiful again with enough care and attention." "That's exactly right. Are you going to restore it?" "We are, if you want to learn." Celestine looked at me, surprised. "Really? Really? I could use an apprentice. And you have good instincts for seeing potential in damaged things." Over the following months, we worked on the Victorian together. Celestine learned to assess structural damage, to distinguish between cosmetic issues and fundamental problems. She developed an eye for original materials, a feel for the house's history and character. Restoration isn't about making things look brand new, I taught her. It's about honoring what was, repairing what's broken, and integrating the damage into the ongoing story without letting it define everything. She understood the metaphor. We both did. By October, the Victorian was nearly complete, structurally sound, historically accurate, transformed but not erased. Celestine had proven herself capable, dedicated, genuinely talented. When I offered her a permanent position with my firm, she cried. "I never thought I could have this," she said. "A career I built myself. A life I chose. You always could. You just needed to believe it." Part 8. The Integration, December 17th. 2025 arrived with the same early snow as the year before, as if time was offering us the chance to rewrite a story that had gone so terribly wrong. Celestine and I spent the morning working on blueprints for our next project, a historic schoolhouse that would become a community art center. She'd developed real skill with technical drawings, her lines confident and precise. "1 year ago today," she said quietly, not looking up from her drafting. "I know. The video has 23 million views now. Sometimes I forget it's still out there, that anyone can watch the worst moment of my life whenever they want. How does that feel?" She considered this carefully. "Less awful than I thought it would. I used to think of it as exposure, all my vulnerability and shame visible to everyone. But lately I've been thinking of it as evidence. Proof that what happened to me was real, that I wasn't exaggerating or overreacting. Other women tell me it helped them leave, that watching someone else's worst moment gave them courage to face their own. That's a generous way to frame it. I'm trying to be generous. With myself mostly, to stop seeing that woman in the wedding dress as someone weak or stupid. To recognize she was doing the best she could with the awareness she had at the time. I set down my pencil, looking at my sister, truly looking at her. The soft roundness that medication and stress had put on her had given way to lean strength. Her hair, grown out from the wedding style, was pulled back in a practical braid. Her hands, once manicured and purposeless, were calloused from restoration work. She looked like herself in a way I'd never seen before. "I'm proud of you," I said. Celestine met my eyes, and in them I saw something I'd been hoping for. Not happiness exactly, but something more durable. Peace, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You could have. Eventually. But I'm glad I could help make it sooner." That evening, we drove up to the mountains, parking at a trailhead that offered expansive views of Boulder spread below, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. We sat on the hood of my truck, sharing hot chocolate from a thermos, watching the sky transition from blue to purple to the deep indigo of winter evening. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Celestine asked. "Cutting yourself off from the family, from all those years of history?" "No. Do you regret leaving Marcus?" "Not even once." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only develops between people who've learned to exist in each other's presence without performance or pretense. "Mom called me yesterday," Celestine said eventually. "She's coming to visit in February. Wants to see what we're working on," she says. "But I think she wants to apologize. Or try to, in her way. How do you feel about that?" Cautious, but open. "I'm learning that having boundaries doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It just means being clear about what I will and won't accept." "That's very mature of you." I learned from the best. The stars began emerging, visible in a way they never were in Boston or even Boulder proper. Out here in the mountains, the darkness was clean and complete, allowing light to travel unimpeded across vast distances. "Thank you," Celestine said quietly, "for not giving up on me. For coming to get me even though I didn't invite you to the wedding. Even though I'd been terrible to you." I reached for her hand, held it gently. "You're my sister. I'll always come get you." Epilogue. The ongoing work, too. Years later, our restoration firm had expanded. Celestine had become licensed, taking on her own projects with the same careful attention to structural integrity and historical accuracy I'd taught her. We'd restored 7 buildings together, each one a collaborative effort. Each transformation proof that damage doesn't have to be permanent. The video of Marcus slapping Celestine still existed, still accumulated occasional views when domestic violence discussions trended. But it had become contextualized, part of a larger narrative about surviving abuse, finding courage, rebuilding life from fragments. Marcus had moved to London, his American reputation irreparably damaged. We heard through Imogen that he'd married again, another young woman from old money, another person who presumably didn't know to watch. For the warning signs, Celestine had started dating someone, a quiet geologist, who studied rock formations and understood that transformation happened slowly, under pressure over time. She was cautious but hopeful, bringing him to Sunday dinners where we cooked together in my kitchen and talked about work and weather and the ordinary miracles of chosen family. My mother visited twice a year now, our relationship still complicated but less fraught. She'd never quite apologized for her role in pressuring Celestine to stay with Marcus, but she'd stopped trying to rewrite history, and sometimes that was enough. I continued my work, each restoration project teaching me something new about patience, about respecting the past while building toward futures that honored, rather than erased what had come before. And Celestine bloomed. There's no other word for it. She grew into herself with the kind of confidence that comes not from never being broken, but from learning you can survive breaking and rebuild something even more beautiful from the fragments. On quiet mornings, we still sat together with coffee, watching light move across the Flatirons, the mountains standing as they always had, ancient, damaged by weather and time. Enduring. I've been thinking, Celestine said one such morning, about starting a nonprofit. Something that helps women in abusive relationships get legal representation, escape funds, practical support. That's a beautiful idea. I want to call it the second invitation. Because sometimes the first invitation, to the wedding, to the relationship, to the life someone else planned for you, isn't the one you should accept. Sometimes you need a second invitation to something better before you can leave. I thought about this, about the invitation I'd unwittingly sent by simply being present when Celestine needed escape, by having built a life that demonstrated other possibilities existed. Yes, I said. That's exactly right. The sun climbed higher, the morning unfolding with all the ordinary magic of time continuing, of lives being lived with intention and care. The work of restoration, of houses, of selves, of relationships, was never finished. But it was always worthwhile. And sometimes, the spaces we weren't initially invited into became the very places where we learned to truly belong.